Clark and Stephanie White definitely had a situation where they was in a heated exchange right before halftime. Guys, for this one here, we got to go all the way up to Indy. Let's get it.
Caitlin Clark had finally reached her breaking point. After weeks of being ignored, overlooked, and buried in a system that made no sense, she stood up, looked Coach Stephanie White in the eye at halftime, and said what everyone else was too afraid to say, and in that moment, everything changed.
She got there. Now here is Clark. Eyes ahead. Lob inside. Finds Boston right on the money.
The Indiana Fever didn't just win a game against Atlanta, they flipped the entire narrative, turned chaos into clarity, and sent a message loud enough to shake the rest of the league. But what really happened behind the scenes that night? What exactly was said in that fiery, tension-filled halftime exchange between Caitlin Clark and Coach Stephanie White that made certain players suddenly start playing like their careers depended on it? Because the way this team came out of the locker room in the second half wasn't just different, it was unrecognizable. The energy shifted. The urgency skyrocketed. And the body language? It screamed of accountability. Something real happened in that locker room. And no, this wasn't just a random spark or a coincidence, it was a calculated, emotional turning point ignited by a player who had finally had enough of being quiet while everything around her burned. This wasn't just another basketball game in Indianapolis. This was a wake-up call, a reset, a moment where one voice, Caitlin Clark's, rose above the noise and demanded change. And in doing so, she didn't just change a game. She shifted the energy of an entire franchise.
The street is that Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White exchanged words going into halftime of this Atlanta Dream game. Now, I'm here to tell you, no footage has emerged of the altercation, but I'm pretty sure within a couple hours it's going to be roaming somewhere out there that this change.
So here's what we now know, and this isn't just rumor mill nonsense or wild Twitter speculation. This comes straight from multiple credible sources who were actually in the building, people who saw it unfold in real time with their own eyes. There was a heated, direct, no-nonsense confrontation between Caitlin Clark and Coach Stephanie White as they walked off the floor and headed into that halftime locker room. And I know some people will want to dismiss this as just another overhyped moment, another dramatic spin, but hold on, because this one makes perfect sense when you consider everything that's been boiling beneath the surface all season long. According to those in the know, Caitlin looked her coach straight in the face and said what nobody else had the courage to say, that if Indiana wanted to win, if they had any shot at salvaging this season, then Kelsey Mitchell and Natasha Howard needed to sit down. Why? Because they weren't moving the ball. Because they were hijacking possessions. Because Caitlin was out there fighting through double teams while her own teammates acted like ball movement was optional. And honestly, good for her. Someone had to say it. Someone had to finally cut through the noise, the excuses, and the blind loyalty and tell the hard truth. Because for anyone who actually understands basketball, anyone who has truly watched this team this season, it's been painful to witness. Possessions dying in isolation. Open shooters being ignored. Caitlin Clark standing with her hands raised, begging for a pass that never comes. And through it all, she kept her head down, until this moment. Until she finally couldn't stay silent anymore. And the second she spoke up, everything changed.
Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White were having a heated discussion at halftime. Word in the street is Caitlin Clark told White to sit Kelsey Mitchell and Howard because they don't pass. Could be true. Caitlin went to tie her shoe. Like, that is something that I noticed. Like, Caitlin literally, when Natasha Howard had the ball, she didn't even look. She was basically walking back on defense. She essentially walked back on defense every time Natasha Howard.
Let's rewind and talk about what actually led up to this explosion, because this moment didn't just appear out of thin air. It wasn't random. It wasn't impulsive. Caitlin Clark isn't some overhyped rookie with a short fuse. She's not the kind of player who lashes out for attention. No, this was the eruption of a storm that's been brewing for months. She's been stuck in a system that's not just ineffective, it's insulting to her basketball IQ and completely incompatible with the very skill set that made her a generational prospect. This motion offense, the Fever continue to force feed, is a blueprint for mediocrity. It stalls out possessions. It erases rhythm. And worst of all, it sidelines the one player who can make everyone around her better. For weeks, we've watched her clap for the ball, motion to teammates while wide open, and get ignored again and again. We've watched her receive the ball with 2 or 3 seconds left on the shot clock and be expected to salvage broken possessions like a magician pulling rabbits out of hats. This system hasn't just failed to maximize Caitlin Clark, it's punished her for being great. But then came that halftime moment against Atlanta. And like a switch flipping, everything changed. The Fever exploded for 59 second-half points, their highest-scoring half in years. You think that's just a happy accident? A coincidence? No chance. That was the direct result of accountability, honesty, and a long-overdue conversation between a star who'd had enough and a coach who finally listened. But here's the part that truly lights a fire under this whole situation. A video surfaced, harmless on the surface, where players were asked who they'd call in an emergency. Simple enough, right? But guess whose name wasn't mentioned once? That's right, Caitlin Clark. Not a single teammate said her name. And no, it doesn't prove anything definitive, but when you look at that in context, on the heels of a fiery halftime confrontation, it paints a chilling picture of this locker room's chemistry. It's like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, and the image that's forming is one of isolation, jealousy, and disconnect. And yet, in spite of it all, Caitlin showed up in the second half and elevated this team. The energy changed. The offense clicked. The ball moved. Suddenly, she wasn't being ignored. Suddenly, she was getting early touches when she could actually orchestrate. Suddenly, teammates who had been selfish all season started passing. The stagnant, painful ISO ball we've been tortured by all year? It vanished. The difference was so dramatic, it didn't feel like the same team. And the most powerful part? It didn't happen because they added a new player or changed the playbook. It happened because their best player, who had every right to stay quiet and collect her paycheck, spoke up. And that is the mark of a true leader.
Back one for you guys. What was working for you so well, especially in that second half offensively?
Yeah, I mean, I thought we just played with a really great pace. I thought we moved the ball. I thought we cut hard, which opened up the three-point line for us. And then we knocked down some shots, but also I thought our defense was really good. So I think it was both sides of the ball, and kind of felt like how we should get back out there and play, every single game. I think 99 points is, probably the most we put up in quite some time. I think somebody said 59 is the most scored in a second half in, quite a few years.
It was like watching an entirely different team take the floor in that second half, like a switch had been flipped and a fog finally lifted. The confusion, the chaos, the selfish possessions? Gone. And here's where things get really telling, almost uncomfortably so. Natasha Howard, who for weeks had been logging heavy minutes despite repeatedly making questionable decisions with the basketball, turnovers, poor spacing, forced shots, was suddenly glued to the bench during the most critical moments of the game. Fourth quarter? Nowhere to be found. And then there's Kelsey Mitchell, who had 22 points heading into the final period and had been treated like an untouchable offensive engine all season long. She barely saw the court when it mattered most. To the casual viewer, that might look like standard coaching adjustments, just part of the flow. But let's stop pretending. Let's be honest. When you've been riding with certain players game after game, no matter how many possessions they hijack, no matter how many times they ignore your franchise player waving her arms for the ball, and then suddenly, right after a high-stakes halftime confrontation centered around ball movement and accountability, those same players are sidelined. That's not coincidence. That's consequence. That's what happens when someone finally stands up and says, enough. That's the ripple effect of leadership, of truth being spoken behind closed doors, and of a coach, perhaps for the first time this season, making decisions that reflect urgency, not comfort. It wasn't just strategic. It was symbolic. And everyone who's been watching this team unravel all year long knew exactly what it meant.
Matter of time, bro, that Caitlin Clark was going to obviously have words with Stephanie White. We noted that she's been running this motion offense, and Caitlin Clark cannot get in the rhythm. A lot of people thinking Caitlin Clark hurt. I don't believe she's hurt. I believe Caitlin Clark cannot simply get into rhythm. That's why she has not been shooting very well. And I was one of the first people to tell y'all this was going to happen. Told y'all about a week ago, Caitlin Clark was going to come back. And if nothing is going to change, we're going to see the same Caitlin Clark we seen right before injury. And sure enough, this is the same Caitlin Clark we seen right before injury.
The most maddening, soul-crushing part of this entire situation is that none of it is new. This dysfunction hasn't been hiding. It's been happening right in front of our eyes, week after week, game after game, and we've all watched it unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Caitlin Clark, who not long ago was hailed as the most efficient, electric, and visionary player in all of college basketball, has been thrown into a professional system that's not just failing her, it's actively sabotaging her. And what's worse? The media, the critics, the so-called analysts, they're all too eager to chalk it up to adjustment. They say she's just struggling to find her rhythm in the league, as if her game evaporated the moment she left Iowa. But that's not what's happening. Not even close. If you've been watching these games with even a shred of basketball understanding, then you know what's really going on. You see a generational talent being forced to play in a system that makes no sense for her strengths. You see a floor general being told to go stand in the corner like a role player while her teammates overdribble, isolate, and kill possessions. You see her getting the ball with 2 seconds on the shot clock and being asked to pull off miracles just to keep the offense afloat. That's not development. That's not learning the pro game. That's organizational malpractice, plain and simple. In college, she was the engine, she controlled pace, dictated tempo, made everyone around her better. In the WNBA, she's been shackled, her brilliance dimmed by a structure that refuses to give her the reins. And instead of adapting to her genius, the Fever have stubbornly tried to mold her into something she's not. They're not just wasting her talent, they're breaking it down, piece by piece, in real time. And the worst part? It's completely avoidable. They have the player. They just don't have the vision.
Just 4 threes in your last 7 games, but tonight 4 of 5. What got you into the groove tonight in this game?
Hey, you know what? It's about dang time, let me tell you that. I have my... Shoot, it's been a second. I just think for the team, you know, we've had a lot of injuries, we've had a lot of movement. When C's playing, it's a whole different team, and when she's back, you know, we got to catch our rhythm. She's a heck of a player, but we got to find ways to get her involved, but keep people hot. But, you know, for me, it finally felt good. It felt good. Like I said, my family's here, my sisters, my best friends, and so it just felt good to have my family here, so I thought I should do something tonight.
You certainly did something.
And here's the saddest, most infuriating part of this entire saga, when they actually let Caitlin Clark play her game, when they finally give her the keys and allow her to be who she is, the results don't just improve, they explode. That 59-point second half against Atlanta didn't happen because Kelsey Mitchell suddenly transformed into Steph Curry. It wasn't some miracle performance from role players. It happened because, for the first time in what feels like forever, the Fever finally played through their best player, the one who sees the floor 2 steps ahead, the one who elevates everyone around her when the system doesn't hold her back. They let Caitlin orchestrate. They let her dictate tempo. They let her lead. And what happened? The entire offense came alive. But here's where things get really interesting. After the game, when Caitlin Clark stood in front of the media, she didn't call anyone out. She didn't boast. She didn't throw teammates under the bus. No, she was pure class. Polished. Diplomatic. She complimented her team. She praised the ball movement, talked about the pace, mentioned how players cut hard and opened up space on the perimeter. But if you were really listening, you heard something deeper. That interview was a masterclass in veiled accountability. Every compliment was also a subtle indictment of how bad things had been before. She highlighted the very things that had been missing all season long: movement, unselfishness, rhythm. It wasn't just praise. It was a quiet, elegant call for change. And then we have to address the elephant in the room, the coaching situation. Look, this isn't a personal attack on Stephanie White. She's smart. She's experienced. She's earned her way in this league. But sometimes, even good coaches don't fit with great players. And the real danger is when organizations refuse to admit that mismatch exists. This motion offense that White insists on running? It may work with a different roster. But with this group? It's a disaster. When you have Caitlin Clark, a once-in-a-generation offensive catalyst who can bend defenses just by existing, you don't run a system that minimizes her touches. You don't ask her to stand in the corner and wait. That's not just ineffective, it's basketball malpractice. And let's talk about Kelsey Mitchell for a second. She's a talented scorer, no doubt about it. But the system has her taking contested fadeaways, playing hero ball, being forced into a role that doesn't suit her strengths. She should be spotting up, catching passes from Caitlin, and knocking down threes off the kind of clean looks Clark generates with ease. Instead, the system is turning her into a volume shooter forced to create out of nothing. That's not on Kelsey. That's not selfishness. That's bad design. That's what happens when coaching philosophy ignores player strengths, and Caitlin Clark has been the biggest victim of that stubbornness all season long.
When Natasha Howard had the ball, she didn't even look. She was basically walking back on defense. She essentially walked back on defense every time Natasha Howard had the ball. And by the way, if you guys didn't see Natasha Howard...
Watching Natasha Howard, an experienced veteran with championship pedigree, consistently make reckless decisions with the basketball while Caitlin Clark stands wide open on the perimeter has been one of the most maddening visuals of the entire WNBA season. And then came the breaking point. On one possession, Howard literally played help defense on her own teammate, a moment so absurd, so telling, that it perfectly summed up the confusion, dysfunction, and lack of chemistry infecting this Indiana Fever roster. But here's where things got really interesting, because rather than sulk, rather than ask for a trade, rather than make passive-aggressive comments to the media, Caitlin Clark did something that leaders do: she confronted the problem head-on. She had a direct, honest, uncomfortable, and desperately needed conversation with head coach Stephanie White at halftime. And to White's credit, she didn't dismiss it, she listened. Adjustments were made. Roles were recalibrated. Minutes were redistributed. Suddenly, Natasha Howard, who had been playing heavy minutes all season, was glued to the bench in crunch time. Kelsey Mitchell, who had scored 22 through 3 quarters, barely saw the floor when it mattered. That's not random. That's not normal rotation. That's consequence. That's what happens when a generational player finally puts her foot down and says, enough. But while the second half against Atlanta looked like a different team, flowing, confident, synchronized, the concern remains that this might be a fleeting moment rather than the beginning of a revolution. One inspired half doesn't erase months of dysfunction. The real test will be whether Indiana uses this spark to ignite real, systemic change or simply reverts back to the same tired patterns the moment the fire cools. Because let's be honest, we've seen glimpses of what this team could be. The problem has never been talent. It's been consistency. It's been buy-in. And for anyone out there trying to reduce this to some petty locker room drama or calling Caitlin Clark difficult, let's set the record straight. This isn't about ego. This isn't about control. This is about a once-in-a-lifetime player being forced into a system that actively punishes her strengths instead of celebrating them. Think about the greatest point guards to ever touch a basketball: Magic Johnson, Steve Nash, Chris Paul. Did they change the game by standing in the corner waiting for a bailout pass with 2 seconds on the clock? Of course not. Their greatness was unleashed because their teams built systems around them, not in spite of them. That's what real leadership does. That's what winning franchises do. But the Fever? They've spent 2 seasons trying to jam Caitlin into a blueprint that was never meant for someone like her. That's not just bad basketball, it's bad business. And while we're talking about what real winning looks like, let's give credit to Aaliyah Boston, because in a sea of disjointed roles and confused priorities, she's been the shining example of what buy-in looks like. She doesn't compete with Caitlin for touches, she complements her. She sets hard screens, rolls decisively, finds pockets of space, and finishes plays Caitlin creates. That's not just smart basketball, that's championship thinking. But the real issue? Too many other players on this roster seem more interested in protecting their own shine than in doing what it takes to win. And that cancerous mindset starts with leadership, because if your front office prioritizes culture over maximizing the transcendent talent you drafted, you're not just failing, you're sabotaging your own future. And if you need more proof of how broken things have become, just go back to that viral emergency contact video, the one where not a single teammate listed Caitlin Clark as the person they'd call in a crisis. Not one. For a franchise player, that's more than an oversight, it's a symptom of a deep-rooted problem in communication, trust, and cohesion. But here's the thing about Caitlin: despite the noise, despite the pressure, despite being ignored by her own teammates on and off the court, she's remained professional, focused, committed. She's asked for the most basic adjustments: spacing, tempo, movement. And somehow, those foundational basketball principles have been treated like controversial suggestions. Meanwhile, other teams around the league are maximizing their stars with intention and purpose, while Indiana stumbles through concepts that should be second nature. It's unacceptable. And let's be very real, this is Caitlin Clark's second season. She shouldn't be coaching the coaches. But that's exactly what's happening. That halftime meeting wasn't just about X's and O's, it was about someone finally demanding sanity. And guess what? The second she did, everything improved. The proof was instant. But now comes the bigger question: was that moment a turning point, or just a blip? Because if the Fever return to their old ways, if they continue trying to make Caitlin fit into a system that doesn't fit her, then brace yourself, more clashes are coming. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's time for more discomfort, more accountability, more truth-telling. Because what we saw in that second half wasn't just a better offense, it was hope. Players looked confident. They moved with purpose. The energy shifted. And that's not complicated, that's basketball 101. And if you're still out here criticizing Caitlin for being too vocal, let me ask you, would you rather have a star who smiles through dysfunction, or one who fights for excellence even when it ruffles feathers? The best teams in the world demand excellence. They embrace uncomfortable conversations. They solve problems in the open. That's what Caitlin Clark did. And Stephanie White, credit to her, listened. That might be the beginning of something real, something that lasts. But only if the organization has the vision and courage to see it through. Because the Wnba is rising. The stakes are growing. And if Indiana doesn't figure this out fast, they're going to waste the prime years of a generational player trying to solve basketball kindergarten. What happened against Atlanta? That was a blueprint. A warning. A wake-up call. Now the question is, will they finally wake up?